Okay, so welcome everybody to our Science Communication Postgraduate Information session here for particularly the Master of Science Communication here at UWA. I'm Dr. Heather Bray and I'm the coordinator of the Master of Science Communication here. And I have some lovely panellists that I will introduce to you shortly. But firstly, I want to acknowledge that we're on Whadjuk Noongar land. Our Indigenous Australians are Australia's oldest science communicators, and I want to acknowledge their ongoing custodianship of the land and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. It's a real privilege to be continuing to communicate science and share knowledge on this beautiful country. So I'm going to ask my panellists to introduce themselves now. But before I do, I'm going to model how I'd like them to do it. So I mentioned that my name was Heather Bray and that I am the Master of Science Communication here. I have a background in agricultural science and was a research scientist in Australia, and I worked overseas before coming into science communication. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background as we start to talk about how people come to science communication. So Lily, you're immediately there to me. Would you please introduce yourself and talk briefly about your background and how you got into science communication?
All right. Hi, I'm Lily Litchfield. I did my bachelor's in physics at UWA, finished halfway through 2019, and I'm doing the Masters of Science Communication now.
Excellent, and you're doing the dissertation stream as well. And so we're going to talk about the different streams that are available to you in the Master of Science Communication as we go through the session. I should remind you too, please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A section of the chat so that we can see them, or in the Q&A section of the Zoom. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but there's going to be probably more time for questions and discussion at the end of the session. Rocky, you're next around for me. Could you please introduce yourself?
There we go. Hi, I'm Rocky. I am a STEM content creator at SciTech at the moment. So I'm coming to you live from behind the scenes at SciTech, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's Western Australia's interactive science centre and a statewide outreach program. I started in a Bachelor of Arts from about 2011 to 2013. And then I got a volunteering job at SciTech, then a regular job at SciTech. And then after a couple of years working in science communication, I came back to do the Masters to upskill, and I also did the dissertation track of the program.
Thank you very much. So as a graduate from our program, I'm hoping that you can answer any questions about what it's like to enter the world of science communication once university finishes.
I'll do my best.
Okay, Mel, I'm going anti-clockwise here. Mel, can you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, hi, my name is Melissa Wilson. So I did my undergraduate in creative writing at Curtin University, and I graduated with honours at the end of 2017. After a brief break away from academia, I decided to come back and do postgraduate study. So when I was doing my undergraduate, I fell in love with science fiction and science fiction literary theory, and I love this idea of marrying real science with fiction. And at a recommendation from a friend, she put me onto science communication generally, and that was something I decided I wanted to pursue further. So I decided to come and do my Masters in science communication at UWA. And I am also in the dissertation stream. And we'll be finishing up at the end of this year.
Yay! And I'm hoping that Mel will have a little bit of an opportunity to talk about her research as well in this session. Siobhan, can you please introduce yourself, please?
Yep, so hi everyone, my name is Siobhan. It's spelled a little strangely, but pronounced Siobhan. So I originally started off a bit like Rocky, doing my Bachelor of Arts. I was planning on doing English because I liked writing, all of that sort of thing. But then moved into science, eventually graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Conservation Biology and Science Communication. Throughout my undergrad degree, I realised science communication was the perfect way to sort of marry my interest with writing as well as my interest in science. And so after a 6-month break, which was very well timed at the start of the pandemic, and I managed to miss all that, I came back to do my master's, and I'm now in the dissertation stream as well.
Okay, thanks, Siobhan, and thanks everyone, first of all, for joining me tonight. But as you, hopefully our audience can see that we've already got diverse pathways into the Masters. Not everyone has an undergraduate background in science, let alone science communication. And we've already started to talk about volunteering and different ways to get into science communication careers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Master's program now, its structure and entry requirements and that kind of thing. And then, so please post any questions about that as we go, and I'll try to address them as I see them. Then I'm going to come back and speak to the panel, because I think the best way to actually find out what the master's degree is like is to actually hear it from the people who are currently doing it or who have recently done it. And that way we can talk a little bit more about specific experiences and some of the units that people have really like, I hope. And we can also talk about, again, what actually happens even after the master's degree. We don't have anyone who has done all coursework, so please don't think you have to do a dissertation, and we can talk a little about that, but you can also do the master's degree by just doing coursework, and I'll talk more about that shortly. So I'm going to share my screen again, just checking that we don't have any questions. Nope, not yet. So sharing my screen. Ah, that's right, it's a blank slide. That's scary. That's why I was like, where is my... There we are. Yes, so now I'm going to talk about the Master of Science Communication. And in this photo, you can see Mel at work at our orientation day, which effectively is a kind of outreach activity. So the details, importantly, and here's Rocky and some of his colleagues graduating, just to prove that, yes, he did actually finish. So that's, again, the point of difference between him and some of the other panellists. The attendance mode for the Master of Science Communication can be full or part-time. The duration is 2 years, but you have a maximum amount of which you're doing it if you're doing it part-time. So that's 2 years full-time equivalent. But I've got an asterisk there, because if you have completed the major in science communication here at UWA, or the minor that we now have, you are able to get course credit for 4 units, which is the equivalent of a semester's full-time load. So you may be able to actually complete the Master of Science Communication in less than 2 years full-time. So that 96 credit points each unit, and if you're not familiar with the terminology here at UWA, the unit is what we call a subject, like a topic, and the course is the whole degree. So a unit is worth 6 credit points. So 4 units, 24 points is roughly what you do each semester. Now, the delivery mode for the Master of Science Communication is on campus face-to-face. However, given the situation with the pandemic, I do actually have students attending my classes from all around the world. So if we are able to accommodate students in individual units, we attempt to, but again, the official delivery mode is on campus, but it's always important to have a conversation with both the admission officers and also the coordinator, myself, if you are currently overseas and you'd like to at least start the master's program in a remote learning situation. We do currently have Commonwealth supported places for Australian students, and that means that you're able to get the government to cover part of your tuition fee, so it's a lot cheaper, and you may also be eligible for one of the deferred loan type situations like HECS. Again, I am not the best person to advise you about this, and this is something that the admissions officers within the university are best placed to advise on. And again, that's the information that I have right at this point in time, but that's a situation that's actually beyond our control to some extent. So again, make sure that you have asked those questions if you decide to apply. This is the bit that I do know about, is the options, or I know that I have some control over myself. You can have the option of doing a coursework and dissertation, and I'll talk more about that shortly, or a coursework only option. So you could do, so the dissertation is like a thesis, and you can go down that research route, or you could do coursework only. And maybe one of the things I'll come back to, I guess specifically Rocky, given that he has left the Masters and not gone into a PhD necessarily or a research type role, how the dissertation experience sort of set him up for his current career. We also have entries at both the beginning of the year, so when semester begins in February, as well as mid-year and our semester at the end of July. So you can start at either time of the year. That doesn't mean that we offer exactly the same units in each semester, so you have to pay attention to your study plan, just to make sure that we know what order you can do each of the units in. So that's the main, I guess, the main information about the course. There is more information on the UWA website about the structure of the course, and you're free to email me as well to find out more information, and I have those details at the end of the presentation today. The other thing that I think most people would probably want to know is what kind of prior study do you have to have completed before you can apply to the master's degree. Now, I've already highlighted that it doesn't necessarily matter too much what undergraduate degree you've done, but you have to have done one. So to be considered eligible to apply for the Master of Science Communication, you have to have completed a bachelor's degree or equivalent qualification that's recognised by UWA. And you also have to have an equivalent weighted average mark of at least 50%. So you need to have made sure that you've passed all those requirements, that you have that weighted average mark of at least 50% for a degree, bachelor's degree of equivalent that's recognised by UWA. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in science, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the creative writing or languages space either, because we do have these options for you to take units that will bring you up to the equivalent level of knowledge about science communication. So within our structure, and here we have Lily on our slide here. So there's sort of 4 types of units that are within our Master of Science Communication. First of all, there's the units that we call conversion units. And so these are the units for students who have not studied science communication before. So there's 4 units that are equivalent to the learning outcomes associated with our undergraduate major or minor. And the units that are offered in that conversion space, 3 of them are the undergraduate units. So if you've come from another institution and don't have a relevant background in science communication, you will go back and do those units within the undergraduate, with the undergraduate students. So there's one on science writing, one on science presentations, one on exhibitions and interpretation, which is how we communicate science in the museum and science centre, Botanic Garden, zoo space. And one is similar to a unit that we have in our undergraduate space, but this one's actually offered at master's level, which is really about communication within science. It's called the Conduct, Communication and Ethics of Science, but it's really looking about how scientists communicate within science, so report writing, interpreting data, that kind of thing. So if you have a science degree, you probably wouldn't do that one. If you have a background in writing or media, you would probably get credit for science writing. So it just depends on what background you have as to which of those conversion units you may need to do, if any. Then we have the core units, and these are compulsory for everybody who is doing the Master of Science Communication. There's a number of them, and I'm not going to list them all now, but these are, some of them are designed and delivered by me that are specific to science communication. But because science communication borrows from other fields, we also have units that are taught by media and communications, by sociology, by politics, etc. Then we have the dissertation units. Now these include dissertation units proper, which is where you have the time to go and do an original research study. We also have units that prepare you for that research process. So for 2022, there will be a research design unit that you do that teaches you how to design research appropriate to science communication. And then lastly, we have option units. Now, if you don't do a dissertation, you can do more option units. Everyone does the same core, but it depends on whether you choose a dissertation or not as to how many option units you get. I believe you do still have some spaces, if I remember rightly, about the option units if you go down a dissertation route. I can see that I've just seen a question pop up. I believe I'm about to, I'm pretty sure this is my last slide in this section. So I will just check. Yes, so that's a perfect time for me to just check that question and then to start asking questions of the panel to tell you a bit more about that experience. So let me stop sharing. Right, so I have a question about, I'm in Melbourne, is there any option for me to enrol as an online student, or must I absolutely relocate to Perth? This is really what I was saying, in that particularly in this time with COVID, we understand that not everybody can get to Perth particularly easily, whether it be in Australia or overseas, and that individual units have been made available to students to study online. I'm very interested in making it easier for students to study online, but that's not set in stone yet. So Darren, and to everyone else who's also interested in that question, I'm not going to rule it out, but I can't say categorically that yes, you would be able to complete the degree online, and it would also just depend on the study plan and which units may be offered online. So that's really something to follow up with me and the UWA admissions team to see whether that's something that you can do. As I said, it's something that I'm very interested in doing and I'm looking at doing, but I can't say, it would be inappropriate for me to say that that's something that's going to happen for sure at this stage. So we have another Q&A, another question. Oh no, that's thanks, Darren. Yeah, so please follow up with me, Darren, I guess is the easiest option there, but I just wanted to make sure that I said that for everybody. So I mentioned that I think the best way for me to talk a little bit more about the experience and what actually happens in the degree is to invite our panel to say more. I've also been blabbing on now for quite a bit. So I think I'm going to start with Siobhan, because you were in that situation where, having done the undergraduate major, you were able to skip, for want of a better word, the conversion units. So then how was that experience then going from an undergrad psychom into postgrad psychom? Did you feel that you were prepared for everything we started to talk about in the masters?
Yeah, so, you know, the undergrad science communication major paired really well with my, at the time, conservation biology major. And so they worked really well together. You know, if I was going to go on and, you know, work within the communications field, it would have been great just to even do like the science communication major in undergrad. But coming into masters, I found that, you know, having done all of those units already, the science communication major really helped set me up to I guess more quickly understand all of the concepts we were talking about in masters and all of those sorts of units. But at the same time, you know, doing those conversion units before you start your other masters units, it's a perfect way to go into the masters course, and it really does set you up to, you know, for success, I guess, within masters.
So do you feel like there's still enough to do? Like, it wasn't a case of you had done the major and that's enough? Did you feel that there was going to be more to come in the masters and give you more depth in science communication?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like there's still more to come, and I'm almost finished my degree.
Well, come and do a PhD with me. Which course is postgrad? And I'm open to that too, by the way, everybody, just in case there's anyone out there wanting to do a PhD with me too. So thanks, Siobhan. I might go with Lily with you, because you had done the science degree and then came into science communication, but without any undergrad. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that was like for you, and, you know, how did you hear about science communication? Why did you come and do the masters?
Well, coming from physics into science communication was actually quite difficult, as it's a very different style of writing and research that I completely was not used to and had to sort of build that up. So the selection of conversion units were quite helpful, especially science writing. And the reason why I moved over was that I was interested originally in going into government policy about science, and that's what the uni admin team told me was an option. But my priorities have changed and shifted over time, and I was originally going to do coursework and decided to do a dissertation, and yeah.
Yeah, I'd really like to come back to how the changes that happened, you know, through this as well, because I think, you know, I'm lucky enough to have worked with all of you in some capacity, Rocky even as a tutor with one of my units, but to see how people have learnt new things and gone, oh, I'm actually liking this thing over here. I thought I was going to like that thing over there. So I really want to come back to that. Now, what about you? Because you had a little bit of a break and coming from creative writing, how was that for you coming into SciComm? And yeah, I guess your motivations for that too.
So I actually found that it was fairly similar, like a lot of the output and the work and stuff was very similar to what I'd experienced in my undergraduate as a creative writer. So I didn't feel necessarily lost in that sense, but it was a bit of a shock to the system coming back after 2 years of working full-time, not related to academia. So it was a bit of a punch to the gut, having to come back and do assignments and structured work and all that kind of stuff. But it turns out I am a sucker for punishment and I really, really enjoy it. So yeah, it was great. Good experience to come back and do. And it has certainly motivated me to keep going. So that's been good.
Yeah, well, I mean, I came back to, so I didn't do a Master of Science Communication at UWA. I was interstate. So I did a graduate diploma in Science Communication. I had, as I mentioned before, was working as a scientist. So I was still a few years, you know, post-PhD, which is a little different. It's really kind of like a job, and had, you know, a 1-year-old baby when I returned to postgraduate study. And that was all by distance. I say correspondence, which kind of ages me a little bit, but getting back into the routine can be challenging. But I just felt that it was so important to actually have a qualification and go back and learn. I'm not the kind of person to just go, oh, I'll be able to move into this and then I'll think about training later. I'm a bit too Gen X for that. I wanted to actually do formal training to learn these new skills so that I could establish myself in this new career. Rocky, how about you? Did you come straight from undergrad into postgrad, or did you take a break?
So as I mentioned, when we were introducing ourselves, I did a Bachelor of Arts from 2011 to 2013, majoring in communication studies and linguistics. So it's all about the words and all about the language for me. And then during my final year, I actually spotted a friend's volunteering handbook for here at SciTech. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So my final year, I was spending Wednesdays volunteering at SciTech and studying at uni. And I ended up getting a job there pretty much straight after I graduated. So I spent 3 or 4 years presenting on the floor, which is very like, it's the ground level sort of really foundational stuff where you're interacting with visitors every single day. And I leveled up a little bit after that. I ended up presenting in the planetarium, but it was still face-to-face every single day. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, well, I can see that this is something that I want to do. This kind of stuff is the stuff that I like talking about. But what's next? Because there isn't really an obvious path, at least in SciTech and in most institutions like this, there isn't really an obvious sort of upskilling path within the organization. So I decided that science communication was kind of the thing that I wanted to do. And that happened to be the year that they opened the master's program back up. So it was very good timing on that part for me. And I came back and enrolled. I kept working at SciTech took a little break, worked at UWA, did some other things. I have ended up back here, but it's definitely not the only place that you can work with a psychom degree. It's just where I've ended up and kind of where I feel comfortable. So yeah, I guess that was where I came from. I was looking for a level up, looking for a step up. So like Heather, I was kind of looking for that upskilling and needed a place to get it, but also kind of like Mel, I found the actual work I was doing in the master's course very similar to the kinds of things we were talking about in communication studies and very similar to the things we were talking about in linguistics, just much more targeted and applied. So comm studies and linguistics, very broad, very like, here's how everything works. But psychom is like, you want to do some things with language, you want to get some ideas across or change some minds, and here is how we're going to do that. So it's same skill set, but applied in a very different way, is what I sort of found.
Yeah, and when I say that I'm not the sort of person to just dive in, I should say I did actually start off volunteering as well in a science centre, and I had always intended to do the grad dip, and I ended up doing the same thing, the two together, but was very much prepared to sort of start at the bottom, which of course isn't what everyone has to do, and you certainly don't all have to work in science centres. So one of the things that I mentioned after the conversion units was our core units. And so one of the core experiences for every science communication master student is a practicum. So even if you have some work experience in science communication, a practicum is a really good opportunity for you to go and work with an organisation in depth. There's a variety of experiences. So I'm going to ask everybody in turn to just to talk about the experience of doing the practicum as part of the masters. Siobhan, can you talk about your work with WA farmers as part of your practicum?
So I did my practicum, when was it? Last year, second semester of last year. And I worked at WA Farmers Federation, which is a agricultural federation that represents WA farmers in terms of like what they want politically, what they need from the government, you know, sort of campaigning for them and whatnot. My role there took a lot of different things from my degree, not only my science background of understanding how agriculture works, you know, the biology and all of that, but so much of it was the communications and how to strategically make communications around certain topics such as agricultural science or, you know, sensitive topics around farmers, what they want and that sort of thing. I also worked a little bit on some education material, which I wasn't actually expecting, but works really well within the science communication sort of education that I've had. And so it's another path that I realised works really well with the science communication masters because, you know, education, science communication sort of, you know, aligned in that way. It was a really, really good experience, and I think practicums are so worth your time, even do it in undergrad, do it in masters, because the amount of experience and the amount of links that you see between your education and how you apply it in the real world is so valuable.
Excellent. Mel, can you tell me about yours?
Yeah, so I most recently, actually just recently finished my placement hours. I was with the RAIN study. So they operate currently out of UWA, like on campus, but they involve all of the universities in Western Australia. They're the longest running cohort study to do with pregnancy and population health. And they've been running since 1989 and they're still going strong. So they've just celebrated 30 years. My role as one of their many interns, there ended up being 4 of us
From SciComm, yeah.
From SciComm for this semester. So my role was actually primarily to create, brainstorm, come up with ideas for a celebratory book that celebrates the 30 years of the RAIN study. So it's a little bit less science communication work. It was more playing to my creative writing and professional writing and publishing education from my undergraduate, but that was the skill set that for me was the strongest, that fit with the organization at the time, and the communications manager was very, very, very keen to utilize that because it was a project that she'd been trying to get up and running for such a long time. So she definitely saw me as the perfect person to try and accept that challenge, which in 3 weeks I was able to put something together, and I have just accepted a contract to actually make that happen. So that's really fantastic. Part of that as well, I was on a small team to do with visual consent. So this was more of a research side to it. So my role was very, very small. I wanted to know more about the area that they were trying to break into. So I did almost a full-scale literature review search because I was working with people who were very, very, very busy and didn't have time to look for this information themselves. So I summarized about 100 articles for them into a single document so they could look through and see where the project was being situated for further use. So kind of two very, very different aspects of that placement, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Excellent. And I think, Siobhan, you also did yours intensively during one of the breaks. So not everyone has to do their placement in 3 weeks. You can actually stretch that out over a longer time. Research sort of segues to Lily, which I feel a little strange asking you to talk about your internship experience, given that you interned with me. But can you please talk about your internship experience, please, Lily?
Yeah, I was Heather's intern over the last semester, and I was tasked with helping with some social media work and getting the science communication name out a bit, and organizing some master's student projects based on what we wanted for the sort of master's student community. I also helped with some research assistance, which then eventually turned into a co-authorship position on a paper that we're working on.
Yeah, which is excellent. And I think, that, again, that idea about authorship, either through internships or as part of your dissertation experience, is quite important to us. Rocky, can you give us a quick rundown of what you did for yours all of those many years ago?
Yeah, I actually had to open my CV to check when it was. That was April to May 2018. I had just about the easiest prac in the world because I did mine with Mike Hopkins, who's at the time was the energy and environment editor with The Conversation. I think he's now the science section editor, so even better. And he actually happened to be based at UWA. So my prac supervisor came to me, and he worked off his laptop, and he would come and sit in the SciComm office, and we would do our sort of pitches and find experts to write articles for The Conversation together in my office, which was very nice. But yeah, that kind of writing journalism side of thing was what I was interested in. And we happened to have someone in the network who, in that professional network, who was happy to have me on board with a pretty high profile publication. So that was, it was really good.
Excellent. Don't forget, you can pop questions on the Q&A in the Q&A box, and we'll come around to those. They can be questions for the panel, not just for me as well. And I'm hoping that rundown through the practicums has both given you an idea of one of the sort of core experiences within the Masters, but also the diversity of comms jobs, science communication work out there. So, oh yes, we do have a question. Lovely. Okay. So, why are we better than ANU? Well, because we're in Perth. No, I shouldn't be quite that cheeky.
Look, ANU's in lockdown right now, and we're not. So that's why.
No, that was me being a bit cheeky. Look, I guess to say what's the point of difference between us and ANU would require me having a fair bit of familiarity with exactly what they're doing. I do know a little bit about their offering, but obviously, don't want to comment on that too much. I think one of the advantages that we have is the cohorts. It might not sound like an advantage, but the cohorts are quite small. And that means that you do get a lot of time with the staff, me, as well as the extended team that I have. I also have freelance science writers and adjuncts helping me deliver the course content. But I think, what would you guys all agree that the smaller cohort is probably one of the things that, you know, not to put words in your mouth. Does anyone want to say anything to that? Yeah,
especially coming from physics, where every unit is taught by a different person, and I didn't really ever get to know anyone. Coming to science communication, where a lot of the units are taught directly by you, I got to know you specifically, and I got to like understand like where you were coming from, and got to know a lot of the other students quite well, and I rather like that.
So, I mean, obviously too, there are 2 master's degrees offered by ANU, and we don't have an equivalent to the Master of Science Communication Outreach, which, you know, the so-called Science Circus. Our master's is a lot more similar to their other Master of Science Communication. We also have, so similarly, I do believe they have core, and we draw on the option units. I think UWA's strength in marine and the biological sciences more broadly, if those are science areas that you are interested in communicating in, UWA is a number 1 in Australia for biological sciences on most of the ranking systems, and so your access to scientists is really important, and particularly the emphasis on marine and the emphasis on a part of the world that is often neglected. Having moved here to take up this position, the emphasis on the Indian Ocean and facing west, and when you sort of look that way around the world, you see that there's a lot of ocean, and there's a lot of diversity in terms of the cultures that we interact with. And so if you're interested in sort of pivoting a little bit more and facing west and interacting more with Southeast Asia and even the African continent, etc., then this is the place to be. And yeah, Perth's a pretty good place to live. Yeah, great response to a tricky question. I'm very fortunate to collaborate with ANU. I don't actually have anyone co-supervised by people from ANU, but I do research with the team at CPAS. I know them all very well, and we're also very much open to collaborations both in teaching and research, so you never know. Before the other thing I think I was going to touch on was some of the other units, given that we're sort of 10 past. I'm going to put you all on the spot and say, can you tell me what your favourite unit was and why? And then lastly, I'm going to, depending on the questions, I will ask you to give a bit of a summary about the research that you have either done, doing or planning to do. But I'm going to ask you more about sort of coursework units at the moment. What was your favourite unit and why? I'm going to start with Siobhan.
Oh, this is such a hard one. Is this going to be
all awesome?
Masters especially, because there's a lot of science communication units that to me are all sort of...
The ones you did as undergraduate are conversion, so I'm still counting them in there. So yeah.
Okay. So my first response then is science presentations, simply because I was terrible at presentations when I first came to uni, and doing that unit made me so much more confident and able to talk to, you know, crowds of people. And it has been, I think, one of the number 1 things that has helped me at every internship and every job that I've had since. That's for sheer, like, picking up skills, picking up the confidence, all of that sort of thing. But in terms of like more academic enjoyment, I would say science communication as an academic discipline, actually named.
We can debate the naming of that particular unit later, but I'm really glad to hear that presentations was one of your favourite units. So the way we have the undergraduate and the conversion units is they focus on communication in science, as I mentioned, but communicating through the spoken word or embodied communication, which is presentations, communicating through the written word, science writing, and communicating through place and object, which is exhibitions and interpretation. And so presentations doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the most outgoing, extroverted person who wants to make a living on the stage. The way that particular unit runs now, it also focuses on the production of podcasts and videos, given the importance for digital production skills. Rocky, what was your favourite? And hopefully it's one we still have.
Yeah, I think my favorite was science and the media, which is no longer offered, but all of the good bits of that are now in presentations.
Yes.
So science and the media was the unit where we made a podcast, a website, and a short film. And then the podcast and the short film, or the podcast and the video, are now in presentations, correct? Yeah. So that one was really good because it was a whole bunch of skills that I had not had the chance to stretch before. I really saw myself as a writer and a presenter, but a very much an in-person presenter going into the masters, and that kind of opened up all these other possibilities and kind of introduced me to the idea of making podcasts, which was awesome because that's now a huge chunk of my job is making, depending on how you count them, like 2 or 3 different podcasts, depending on which one is on and which one is not. But like that was a thing I'd never tried before. And so I guess to generalize from that a little bit, even if you look at a unit and you think, oh, I don't think I want to do presentations, I don't really like being outgoing, don't really like talking to crowds, it's really worth doing these units that push you, because you never know where you're going to find something that, to borrow a phrase, really sparks joy.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Mel, what was your favourite unit so far?
So mine was a conversion unit. It was actually exhibitions and interpretation. So for me, it was a good mix of theory and being able to be creative as well, but not in just a creative writing sense. Like the final assignment we had to do, creating an actual exhibition and designing an actual exhibition, was a good mix of integrating theory behind why you were doing what you were doing. You got to pick your own topic. So I got to look at something really in depth that I'm really passionate about, which was marine debris in the oceans, and then use my creative skills as well to bring it all together and actually showcase how I wanted it to look and why it needed to look that way. So it was very, very enjoyable for me to be able to, integrate that all together.
Excellent. Oh, that's lovely to hear too. There's a question on the Q&A about job prospects. I'm going to ask Lily to talk about her favourite unit, and then I will come back to that because that was another thing that was on my list that I definitely did want to cover tonight. And so, Rocky, that's going to come to you, given that you're the graduate. I'll also talk a little bit about my own career, but particularly if you can sort of think on some of your colleagues, your peers, and the kind of destinations that they've been to now. But first, Lily, tell me about which was your favourite unit so far and why?
Absolutely, science communication as an academic discipline, affectionately known as SCAD. But it allowed me to use like a lot of the things that I learned from philosophy, because I took almost a philosophy major during my studies, and the sort of freedom and ability to choose what I wanted and be more personal and polemic in the way that I was writing was something that I found to be very different from physics, and an area that I found that I really, really liked coming into the unit, and it's pushed me on to wanting to do a dissertation that's kind of related to my work there as well now.
Fantastic, thank you. So I hope everyone can see there that the units that everyone was talking about, that was not prompted. I didn't know they were going to, I didn't know which ones people were going to say. So it's lovely that you all kind of highlighted different ones. But hopefully our audience has heard that there's a combination of both theory and skills embedded in practically every unit, particularly those conversion units and also some of the master's specific units, that you learn how to do the things, but also learn why and when, and you know, to whether we should and how to target those more effectively. So I hope that you can see that all of our units and the program as a whole has been developed to both give practical skills as well as a really solid theoretical background that will set you up to be a successful science communicator. That segues, Rocky, into job prospects. So just to talk about my own career, when I did volunteer at the Science Centre and did my graduate diploma. My first job as a qualified science communicator was for a research centre developing genetically modified crops. So it was an agricultural research centre which complemented my background in agriculture. It was my job to develop and deliver their community engagement program nationally. So I was involved in developing things for schools, for community groups. I was teaching or helping postgraduate students learn presentation skills. I then moved into another area, and as technology has changed, moving into managing social media for research organisations. I've done a radio production course because we were running a radio show to develop material for podcasting, so moving into that world. And then coming back to academia. Most people who become science communicators do not come back to academia. So now I'm something that's very niche. I'm really a science communication communicator. I love teaching, but most things in SciComm I've done at some point, working in the science and the museum sector, working for a research organisation, developing programs for schools, producing social and new media. So I've been fortunate to have a very varied career. Rocky, tell me about your brilliant career and the brilliant careers of all your peers.
Yeah, I'm going to start by saying that, kind of riffing off what you've said, which is being a science communication communicator, and say that the same thing that I said at the last careers night that we had, which is that one of the most important things you can learn as a science communicator is how to explain what science communication is and why you need one, or why you need a science communicator. So a lot of people need a science communicator and they don't know it. And so I have worked here at SciTech. I've also worked at universities, not necessarily as a communications officer. I actually worked as a learning designer and also as an educational technologist. So it's similar kind of stuff where we're making communications materials and we're making sure that they're all lined up and pointing in the same direction at the same audience. It's the same concept, but applied in a different setting. So that the actual skills that you learn, provided you have the ability to articulate what those skills are and why they're relevant, are in extremely high demand. And so you don't necessarily need to feel limited to like science communication jobs, and you definitely don't need to feel limited to working in a museum or a science center. So I have colleagues who did the degree who have gone off sort of to the comms side and are doing comms jobs in government departments, comms jobs at universities, comms jobs for other organizations. And I know a couple have gone back into science, but in roles where they have taken on some of that, they're valued because they've taken on some of that work as someone who is skilled in that work from other sort of members of the lab who don't necessarily want to do it, which is fairly common. And I know people who have ended up heading off and starting their own businesses or freelancing, and there's plenty of that kind of work around as well. And one of the things that the degree will give you is the knowledge about who to talk to and what kinds of questions to ask, and like even down to like what kinds of keywords do you need to look for in job ads to know that like actually what that person wants isn't you know, a programs officer or a this or a that. Like what they're looking for is a science communicator, but they haven't figured it out yet. And figuring all of that out for yourself and knowing what those jobs look like by doing one in a practicum, or what those, who sort of some of those people are, because you will end up meeting a lot of them as they sort of float around the general science communication community. That is a huge part of what you get out of the masters. It is that kind of know-how, but also it sounds silly, but it's the network as well. And the masters will get you in that direction. Does that answer your question?
I'm hoping we'll hear. There was also a question. There is also a question about fees. Thank you, Siobhan, for posting a link within the Q&A to the handbook. There was to the information. The link that I posted, Darren, does have a fee calculator link at the very bottom of it. It's the one that says the one that has handbook in the URL, and that should go through to a fee calculator. But I think it is important that, yes, send an email to future students. And as I said, the important thing is that currently we have Commonwealth supported places available. So that's definitely something I wanted to mention. So apologies for not having that information at my fingertips, but hopefully future students can set you up there. I think in terms of future prospects, globally, I went to a conference recently. Globally, we feel, those of us in science communication, in higher education in particular, feel that we're in a bit of a science communication moment. I think the comment that Rocky made about some people need a science communicator and didn't know it, nothing has made that more obvious than the global pandemic that we're in the midst of right now. And I'm hearing people talk about science communication and the importance of helping people access and understand scientific knowledge in places that I never expected to hear it. When you start getting the Prime Minister trying to talk about flattening curves, as he did right at the very beginning, I'm not actually going to say the Prime Minister, I'm not critiquing the Prime Minister's work, but just to even hear somebody trying to explain exponential growth at the early phase of this pandemic made me think, wow, we're going to be seeing something very different here. That doesn't mean to say that we're going to see an explosion of jobs. Unfortunately, things don't always happen that way, but I do feel that anecdotally, I have to explain what science communication is far less now than I have ever had to do at any other point in my career. I think science communication as a discipline, as an area of study and of scholarship, as well as an area of practice, is going to become more important, because as science becomes more complex, we need people that can understand that science as well as understand what's happening in society and make that science fit for purpose, whether that is for a government and for policy, whether it's for a community group, whether it's for an industry group. So I personally believe that we're going to see growth in science communication jobs in the future. We are coming up to 7 minutes to go. I think I did see on the Zoom that it went for 7:30, but we were advertised to go for 6:30, and I like being punctual. It's one of the SciComm skills you learn, is keeping to time. If there's no more questions, I might quickly ask Mel to talk about, or to just quickly describe her dissertation, and then maybe Siobhan's plans and Lily's plans, and then Rocky can even redo his 1-minute summary of the paper he published on his thesis.
We could just send them a link to the video if you like.
Well, one of the things I have got at the end is to encourage people to follow our Facebook group so that you can sort of get a sense of the community and the kind of things that we do. But Mel, can you give me a dissertation in a minute?
Sure, I'll try. So I'm looking at how narrative is used in science communication, so narrative and storytelling. I'm interested in exploring the processes of how these stories are created by science communicators. A lot of the literature is kind of bland and not very helpful. So I wanted to kind of marry my love of creative writing and science communication together in a dissertation, and Heather let me, which was great. So we're bringing creative writers and science communicators together to talk about their experiences and from that, hopefully figure out what the hell's going on with it, because storytelling is something that's used a lot in science communication. It's something that we're told to use, but I don't know if everyone knows necessarily how to do that. So that's what we're trying to figure out, and hopefully use it as potentially for like a training model or something like that, just to help people out, to make it a little bit easier to communicate with other people. That was more than a minute, wasn't it, Rocky?
Well,
that was dead on a minute. That was very impressive. Well done.
Well done.
Nailed it.
So Siobhan, I know that you're very much at the very early stages of your dissertation, but can you give us a 1 minute or less summary of what you're going to be looking at?
All right, don't time me on this because I have no idea how long I'm going to go for.
But you have to make it less than a minute because otherwise we're going to run over time.
Okay. I'll try and be quick. So mine's very topical in that I'm actually looking at the COVID vaccines and COVID information, and I'm looking specifically at how everyday people are responding and talking about this online, because part of science communication, a huge part of it is dialogue. You know, how are people talking to each other? Usually in science communication, we look at how experts talk to non-experts. They have a dialogue with them and they talk about science, and, you know, the non-expert starts to love science and all of that, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm really interested in is how people who aren't experts talk to each other about something as complex as the COVID vaccine and the COVID information. And one of the best ways of doing that is looking at social media at the moment, because it has so many, you know, applications for conversations, for sharing things, for groups and all of that. I'm also running focus groups and that sort of thing. And I just want to know, how are people like forming these opinions, this information with each other about such complex information? How do they get there, you know? So keep a post on that.
Excellent. Liddy, can you do a less than a minute summary? I am going to tell people, Rocky, to just have a look at your video. But Lily, can you just quickly outline what you might be doing? You're also very much in the early stages.
Okay, I'm looking at how scientists in science governance manufacture consent for the things that they're already doing or want to do with their research under the guise of inclusion and helping and including people to the scientific method. Whereas what they're actually doing is they've got an idea about what they want to do anyway, and they just try to manufacture the social license to operate so that they can do the thing that they want to do. And I'll be doing some interviews and figuring out some like institutional things to do with that as well.
Yeah, so I guess still whether that is still what is happening, or whether scientists themselves are genuinely interested in community expectations and attitudes, and that fits under that responsible research and innovation. I've just been told that apparently our course is a lot cheaper, a little bit more. I read a little bit more. Thank you, Darren. It's a little bit more than half the cost. Okay, so that's probably something we should be promoting a little bit more, but I also still want to be able to call the people at ANU my friends, but thank you very much for sharing that, Darren, on the chat. So I do want to try to stick to time. I have been told that we can go past, but given that we were advertised as going till 6:30, I really do want to try to stick to time. So I'm just going to share some final slides that show some points to follow up, and also how, if you are interested in applying, you can. But before I go to those, I want to thank you, all my panelists, for speaking with our audience today and sharing your experiences. And thank you very much to the audience as well. So while you actually can see everybody in my face, hopefully, thank you all very much for participating. So I'm just going to share my screen again. Share. And again, not panic because I left a blank slide there. Hello. Have we got... Oh, we had something there. This is exactly what I wanted. So earlier I did have one of my other students, Crystal, on the slide. I forgot to introduce her. Here we have Cass and Jasmine chilling out at the new WA Museum, thinking very contemplatively about how awesome science communication is. But I actually just really like that image. This was a recent visit to the museum as part of exhibitions and interpretation. So I know that the hyperlinks don't work, but hopefully you can see the key parts of the URLs there. To find more information, please go to the main UWA website that has the information on the courses. We did pop the link to that in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry. I'd also suggest that you follow our Science Communication Facebook page. As I mentioned, this is going to give you a chance to see what the community is like. Most of the people who are already following that Facebook page are alumni, and the students are also becoming involved in managing that page and sharing more information about their experiences. And lastly, I've given my email address there, Heather, heather.bray, B-R-A-Y, @uwa.edu.au, and you're more than welcome to send me an email, and I can try to help as much as I can, or direct you to somebody who can definitely provide you with the information that you need. And so lastly, if you are all interested and ready to apply, here are the steps here. So you can go to uwa.edu.au/apply and click on the login to start an application. And then that will trigger the process where people will actually have a look at, you know, your qualifications, etc., and to see whether you're eligible to apply. So that's really the next steps. I will stop sharing that now, and as I mentioned, just checking that there's no more questions. No, it's now 6:32, so I have gone 2 minutes over. Thanks again for joining us today. If you only managed to get part of this, the recording, a copy of the recording will be sent to everybody who registered. So if you have friends who couldn't attend, let them know that they'll also get a copy of this recording as well. So thanks again to my team. Thank you all for attending, and I look forward to seeing you here on campus, either virtually or definitely physically here by the beautiful Swan River in the future. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.